Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor for me to welcome this august audience to the Rajasthan International Center for what we hope and know will be a very insightful and engaging talk, followed by a discussion on India and the global disorder, the formal title being Tariffs, Tianjin, India and the global disorder. Our eminent speaker today, Dr. C. Raj Mohan, is one of India's foremost foreign policy experts and scholars, and we look forward to his talk on the shifting global landscapes and the changing dynamics between the Trump's tariffs, India relationship with China, etc., also what the word disorder means. But before that, it is my privilege to request Shri U.M. Sahe, the chair for today, and the president of the Rajasthan All India Services Pensioners Association, to please come on stage. Today's talk is part of the Jigyasa Talks series that the Rajasthan AIS Pensioners Association, All India Services Pensioners Association organizes, and now is organizing for the last few months with the collaboration of the Rajasthan International Center. May I also request Dr. C. Raj Mohan to join the chair on the stage. As I mentioned, for anyone who follows news or is reading a newspaper, he needs no introduction, but the chair will be formally introducing him very soon. And a round of applause for our speaker. May I now request Nihal Chand Goyal, Director of the Rajasthan International Center, to come on stage and felicitate our eminent speaker for today, Dr. C. Raj Mohan. Sir. Thank you, sir. Let me now, without wasting any time, let me now hand over the proceedings to U.M. Sai, sir, with the usual housekeeping announcements. Please keep your phones on silent. Don't do any activity that may disturb the speaker or the audience. We will have half an hour of question answers from around 6:45 onwards. So, sir, handing over to you.
Namaskar. Good evening, friends. As you all know, in this Jigyasa Talks program, every month a renowned speaker is invited to deliver his talk on some important topics. Our today's speaker is very famous and very knowledgeable person on international relations, Mr. Professor C. Raj Mohan ji. Professor Raj Mohan is a distinguished professor at the Motwani Jadeja Institute of American Studies at the O.P. Jindal Global University of Delhi and the Korea Foundation chair at the Council on Strategic and Defense Research, Delhi. He is also visiting research professor at the Institute of South Asian Studies, ISAS, National University of Singapore. He was earlier the director of ISAS from 2018 to 2021. Professor Mohan headed the Asia's Society Policy Institute ASPI office at Delhi during 2022 to 2024 and is now a non-resident fellow there. He was also the founding director of Carnegie India Delhi during 2016 to 2018. From 2009 to 2010, Mr. Mohan was the Henry Alfred Kissinger Chair in Foreign Policy and International Relations at the Library of Congress. Previously, he was a professor of South Asian Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi and Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore. He served in several Indian think tanks, including the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis and the Observer Research Foundation, ORF. He has published widely on Indian foreign policy, security policies, Asian geopolitics, and the global governance of advanced technologies. The new book, India and the Rebalancing of Asia, will be published in this month only by the Institute of Strategic Studies, London, as part of their Adelphi series. Professor Mohan is a columnist on international affairs for the Indian Express and Foreign Policy magazine. He is also the chairman of the editorial board of India's World. So now I will request Professor Raj Mohan to deliver his talk. Thank you.
Shri Sahai, thank you for that very generous introduction. Mr. Goyal, thank you for inviting me and hosting me at the Rajasthan International Center. I must also acknowledge Shri Naren Sisodia, whom I've known for almost now close to 40 years. So when I was a young scholar, research scholar at the Institute of Defense Studies, Shri Sisodia was in the Defense Ministry. He was in charge of our institute as one of the joint secretaries in the ministry. That's when I got to know him, and since then we've had regular touch. Then he became director of the Institute of Defense Studies and been a dear friend since then. So it's really a pleasure. Thank you for persuading me to come here. I also see a lot of other friends. I see Ambassador Satish Mehta there, Harsh Sethi, and a whole lot of Mr. Mehta here from Cuts. So it's really wonderful to be here in Rajasthan this evening. I think it's also a special privilege to come to the newly established Rajasthan International Center. I think I've seen many international centers. Actually, it's become like a mini movement in India. We have a center that's come up in Pune. We have a center that is in Goa. We have a center in Bangalore. So this idea that, look, major cities of India need an international center of the kind that we've had in Delhi. I think it's a great idea, and I think the time perhaps is now for much of India to reconnect with the world. I mean, I think at a level that we're talking about here, it's often forgotten how connected we are today to the world. Today, India's GDP of say $4 trillion, trade that is linked to the external world of imports and exports, if you put goods and services together, it comes close to $1.8 trillion. That is almost 45% of our economic activity is linked to the world. But this is not the India I grew up in, where India actually turned inward. Its economy, actually, we don't tell this to ourselves, was on a relative decline as a percentage of the global GDP. Trade shrank from about 2% at independence to we still have not hit 1% barely of global trade. So it was a very different India. Those of us who grew up in the 60s and 70s, India's global footprint for all our foreign policy rhetoric was shrinking. That today you have actually an India that is actually far more connected to the world on economically. We also have a fairly large diaspora abroad, close to 32 million people, Indians outside, and more Indians go abroad to study, to work, short term, long term. So in a way, our footprint is connected to the world in a much bigger way than before. So this really where I think foreign policy or international relations is too important to be left to Delhi or to the Ministry of External Affairs. I think we need a lot more people, I think the civil society, not just in Delhi but outside, to be connected with the rest, with the world, and to engage the rest of the world on basis of, trying to understand and trying to be a bridge between India and the world. And I think that's where the international centers have a great job to do. And I think, as I said, I've been to many international centers, but none of them is as impressive as the Rajasthan one. Truly in Rajputana style. I mean, it's more like a palace. I see that what we've seen. Really, so it's really an amazing structure here with all the laced with the great artistic styles of Rajasthan. So it's really wonderful to see this, and I really wish you extraordinary success in the coming years to be able to become a great hub of, not only Rajasthan, but connecting to the world in a very deep way. So I think to talk about the disorder today, I really think we're really at a very fluid moment in world politics. Fluid in every meaning of the word. That it is, things are changing by the minute. And there's a time when, I think it was Lenin who said, there are times when history doesn't move. For long decades, it remains stagnant. But there are moments when it dramatically accelerates. Every assumption we think we know, and the assumptions on which we operate suddenly collapse. And I think that is this kind of period we are living in today, where many of the larger assumptions we made about the world, globalization, great power peace, multilateral institutions, all these assumptions have actually come crashing down thanks to Trump in one way. We'll talk about it. But I think the signs of it were partly visible in the first term of the Trump administration. But today in the second term, he's come back with far more power and far more public support for overhauling the American system as well as the global system. But if you want me to put just one basic thing that has changed, is the shall we say, the universalist illusion. The notion that the world has universal solutions. Now, the Marxists used to have a sense of history, a sense of where history was going. So the Soviet Union was designed as a pursuit of a globalist idea, of a sense where the world was going, because that came to an end in 1991. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it is the Western world that thought there is a single universalist solution of economic globalization, of a capital that can move freely across the borders, of multilateral institutions which can transcend sovereignty, and that you have a set of universal values. I know that many of us in India did not like this stuff. There was a lot of resistance on the left and the right. There continues to be. But what is interesting is the resistance to globalism and universalism has come from within the West. That is the story today. That it is within the United States that is challenging globalism. In fact, globalism is a bad word in the United States today. When you say globalist, it's an abuse in the MAGA movement. That this notion that small elites in New York and Silicon Valley can decide what's good for the world, that is what is being contested within the US. So you see a return of nationalism. Today, if you see what's happened in Europe in the last few days, the rise of the right-wing parties that question this universalist assumption of how society should be organized. It is a liberal version of universalism that seemed to have a hegemony post-1991. That is being challenged within US, within Europe, and across the world. And I think that's what we are seeing. But to break this down a little bit, let me make five broad points, which are really, one is about the emerging disorder in the economic level, the disorder in the security level, and the disorder in the technological level, and at the institutional level globally, and then look at some of the implications for India from this extraordinary confusion and fluidity that is there in the international system today. Now, post-1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the idea that, look, there was only one path to economic development. That was globalization, liberalization at home, and opening your economy to the rest of the world. And the story of the last 35 years then has been of how do you adapt to this system. Now, the system today is being challenged by number one economy and also by the number two economy. That is, the US and China both are attacking this notion of a globalized economy. Essentially, both of them are trying to weaponize the interdependence for their own national advantages. So when China denies us You want to build roads in Himalayas? Sorry, you can't get mountain drilling equipment. I believe they're going to let us have them soon after the meeting in Tianjin. Or the Americans who can say, look, since you have to export to me, I will set what the tariffs are. Forget WTO. So this notion that you can turn, because China has today 35% of the world's manufacturing industry. Therefore, they can set the terms on which trade in manufactured goods take place. They're monopoly in some sectors, solar cells, batteries. You have, rare earths. So this dominance of control over a certain sector has given them extraordinary leverage. And what Trump is doing is essentially he's saying, I am the destination for much of the world's exports. All of you have no choice but to sell to me. Therefore, I'm going to turn what was a disadvantage in a normal sense of having large deficits. I will turn that into an advantage by telling each one, if you don't buy more from me, I'm going to tariff you. So he's turned what was actually an American position as the biggest importer in the world to change these circumstances, the conditions under which the US economy operates. And I think three, four broad things. I think one, that the US needs to manufacture at home. Because through the 1990s, starting from Clinton's time, the idea that the US can simply outsource its production to other countries. Because the logic of the capital was very simple. Produce where it is efficient. And rather than producing everything at home. So it was no longer a national economy, but a global economy in which the capital will produce in one place, iPhone parts in China, bring it all the way, sell it in another country. So this notion that you can bring in efficiencies to production and thereby increase the profits for the capital. And that structure was rational. It benefited the Chinese. It also benefits us in some sense. But that structure today, within the US, people are questioning, it's all right, the New York has made money, American capitalists have made money, Silicon Valley makes money, but what about the American working class? The rhetoric on working class, I think, thanks to our communists, have kind of disappeared, so we don't hear much of it here. But it is Trump and the Make in America Great movement, which is really a white working class movement that is questioning the fact that by exporting manufacturing jobs, the US has undercut its own working people. That is the principal source of support for Trump today in attacking globalization, that while globalization was supposed to benefit everybody in the US, it actually benefited smaller sections at the top, and the American working classes have moved from having one job in a Ford factory in Detroit in the 1950s or 60s. You could live comfortably in a big house with a car, with 2 kids who are doing well in school. But today, a high school degree doesn't get you anywhere that. Flipping hamburgers is more likely, or doing small jobs. So I think this sense of resentment within the US, which has actually produced this backlash against globalization, and Trump has simply cottoned on to that trend that has emerged, and we see that unfolding. Therefore, a lot of conventional economists will tell you this is not possible. You can't bring back manufacturing. But economists, there's always one hand and the other hand. So at least right now, Trump has defied the conventional logic of what the economists have said. And he says, look, we're going to try and get as much manufacturing into the US. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't work. But that is the experiment that is going on. Linked to this is the other issue, which is really, if you're not only exporting production, but you're also insourcing labor. Outsource production, insource labor. So you have actually a dramatic increase in immigration into the US, both at the lower end, then in things like IT sector, etc. So you have actually the backlash, you've been hearing about backlash against H-1B visas. It's really the idea that, look, you have what was a convenient corporate arrangement between American companies and the Indian companies to take Indian tech talent to work on low wages. We all know that. This is not a secret that you have. I come from Andhra Pradesh. We are now the biggest IT workers in the US. There is even a visa temple next to the American consulate in Hyderabad. So you have actually, everyone wants to do an engineering degree, fly to the US, get a job in the IT sector, make money. But this is really unlike the doctors and who went to the US in the beginning, in the 60s and 70s. The recent migration was really an organized one by the American companies and the Indian companies that saw it as a convenient way of getting people out. But whatever the way it was done, I'm not even talking about the agricultural workers that come from Mexico, but the reaction against too many outsiders. I mean, those of you who are shocked by the attacks on H-1B in the US, I mean, it's much the same in India, right? I mean, you're always looking for foreigners. So having too many foreigners in a short while changes lives, lives of ordinary people. And I think that is actually a serious backlash. And I think what you're going to see is not just the US, the massive movements against immigration in Europe, massive movements against, last Sunday in Australia, the big demonstration, mostly targeting Indians, because within one generation, Indians have become the largest minority in Australia, close to 1 million people in a country of 25 million people. Same story in New Zealand, same story in Canada. So you see actually what was a dramatic expansion of Indian labor migration, professionally a lot of it. As today there is a backlash against it. And I think how this gets sorted out, we're going to see. But I think this is an issue that's going to be around. And for many countries, this doesn't mean no labor exports will take place from India. Actually, Germany has taken almost 10,000 people, mostly IT people, in the last 2 or 3 years. So it is a problem for the Western democracies today is, how do you distinguish between good migration and bad migration? Because there is labor shortage. The question of connecting the shortage of labor to availability of talent somewhere else, how do you manage this process without affecting the social harmony and related issue? And I think that's what we see happening. So it's not the end of exporting labor from India, but I think how we export, the nature of the destination, the terms of that migration, all those are going to change in the coming years. And I think that is one big change that has taken place. The second, I think the same Make America Great Again movement also challenges the security conception, the historic security conception of the United States. That is, the US is the leader of the world. The US, going back to John Kennedy, who said, America will bear any price, bear any burden to exercise leadership in the world. So the MAGA movement today is saying, really? You want to do that? Why am I doing things in Ukraine? Why am I in the Middle East? Why am I trying to defend Taiwan? If Europe is richer than the United States, why should the US be the one defending America against Russia? Sorry, Europe against Russia. Or telling Japan, South Korea, you're rich enough to defend yourself. So the American working class, the white working class, which says you're getting people inside, you're insourcing labor, outsourcing my jobs, and then send my 18-year-old boys to fight in bad lands like Afghanistan or Iraq. That this is simply not unacceptable. So normally we associate peace movements with the left. Today, the rejection of America's global role, that America is the principal security provider to the international system, or self-appointed role, that is what is being challenged today by the new MAGA movement. And how this plays out, we don't know, but I think we see on Ukraine, for example, Trump is one day says, I'm pulling the plug on the war. Next day says, no, I'm going to push the Russians. So the ambivalence from Biden administration time, which is clear, we're going to defend Ukraine with whatever it takes and however long it takes, to one of saying territory for peace is not a bad idea. US is not going to supply arms to Ukraine on some days. So the whole question of how the US will deal with the wars in Eurasian landmass, that is from Europe to Northeast Asia through the Middle East, the historic American role, and historic means post-1945, that role is being questioned. Now, what we don't know yet is where this debate will settle. For example, in the Republican Party, the large sections which are very pro-Israel would want to continue to support Israel, what it is doing in the Middle East. There are people who are very anti-China, who would want the US to really take on China. At the same time, there are others who say, look, it's not none of our business. We shouldn't expend our energies dealing with these security issues. America must look after itself. That is America first. And here I think this is when America first. Also today there is a debate, should the US remain a hemispheric power that is focused on Latin America, its own neighborhood, rather than sending its troops today, massive American troop presence, even compared to the Cold War, it is reduced numbers, but still US has troops in Germany, US has troops in Japan, in Korea, and its US has bases all around this Eurasian landmass. So whether the US will continue this policy, whether it will shrink. Those are the big issues that are being debated. It remains to see how this actually plays out in the coming years. So I think that's where the security issue is being debated. And my sense is where we settle on this is the unknown in the next few years, because there's no guarantee which side it might go. Because skeptics will say, in the end, the US is addicted to leadership. Therefore, it'll go back. The others who say, no, there's a fundamental change in the US. Therefore, the US is not going to keep paying the price for defending Europe, defending Northeast Asia, or playing the role of a responsible actor. So this is the big change again, I think, that has taken place in the US. I think the key, both on the economic and in the security, it is the change in the domestic politics. I think we all assumed for almost 80 years that US domestic politics doesn't matter. That is, it's all about foreign policy. Because we interacted with a set of elites, the coastal elites, who told us that this is what America's policy is, but we never paid attention to America's domestic politics, why sections of the US support or oppose the kind of policies that the US pursues. Today, I think understanding American domestic politics has become very, very critical to see where the US goes on the trade issue, to see where the US goes on the security issue. So the internal politics of the US today come alive, and who wins this debate within the US remains to be seen. A third set of issues, I think, is related to technology. The dramatic change in the technological structure that we see with artificial intelligence. In fact, there's not much debate. Everyone talks about AI. There's less of a debate on biotechnology, synthetic biology, what you talk about. I don't know how many of you heard the story of Xi Jinping telling Putin, hey guys, we can live for 150 years. At age 72, you're just a bacha. Of course, dictators always have a dream to live long enough. Maybe think of Eurasia run by Putin and Trump for another 75 years. But the fact is, there is today the biggest champions of longer life is actually in the Silicon Valley. Today, there is a belief, there's a whole new idea called transhumanism. That is, AI, biotechnology, genetic manipulation, cryogenic technologies give a historic opportunity for mankind to transcend itself. That is, living longer is only one part. How you live, how you can integrate the capabilities of technology. We have Elon Musk stuck in a chip into there's a guy's brain, see how that functions. We have groups in US which are restoring lost species. I mean, this is truly Jurassic Park story. Actually reviving species by picking out genetic material from the past. So, and then using, for example, today we talk about the Air Force, because a lot of focus on Air Force at the Op Sindoor. But you also saw the story on the drones, right? I mean, that it's no longer Air Force operating on its own, but it'll have drones. It's a combined thing of fighter pilots operating with the drone buddies, as they say. But this is just the beginning. That this idea that you can enhance human capabilities through exoskeletons, stronger arms that you can create, that you're creating super soldiers. I mean, this is all no longer a science fiction, but I think we are in the path of developing capabilities that transcend traditional human capability. So then the question becomes, how do you manage this? How do you regulate this? Here I think we've seen the Trump administration has dramatically broken from the Biden policies. While Biden said, look, we're going to regulate these technologies on ethical considerations, on considerations of social good, Trump in the last 6 months has overturned every single rule that Biden had put on AI. And today he's talking about unleashing the Silicon Valley capital to go full steam in developing artificial intelligence capabilities. And he said, like, we are in a race with China, and we want to win that race on artificial intelligence. There's not enough public focus on biotechnology. That's another big area where there's actually, the Chinese are pretty advanced. So what you see is actually the two superpowers, if you will, US and China today, are investing in these new technologies in a way that maybe Soviet Union and America did on space and nuclear in the 1950s. But the scale and consequences of the new technologies that are emerging are quite dramatic, and we're going to see a lot of that unfold. And historically, we know that when, again, it was Marx who said, if you change, there's a new forces of production, then you create new relations of production along with it. That is, if AI, today biotechnology, they represent a fundamental change in the way we interact with nature, then the consequences of it for social stability at home and power distribution within the international system are all up for play. And I think this is really a dramatic moment in that sense, a fundamental qualitative leap in the technological change. So in the competition between US and China today, you have this massive race going on, and how to set the terms of this race, which is the debate. And I think many of us, unless we move now quickly, are going to be passive participants to see how US and China are operating this. That brings me to the fourth point, which I wanted to talk about, was really breakdown of the multilateral institutions. The UN Security Council, which we want to be, really doesn't work. So this idea that, look, Security Council is somehow, it's a privilege to be there, but today Russia does what it wants. It invades a country, there's nothing much happens. China has occupied territories in South China Sea, nothing much happens. Trump bombs the hell out of Venezuela, nothing happens. So you have actually a situation where this notion that there is a collective security arrangement at the global level, because the UN Security Council never really worked in the way it was meant to be, except for a brief period in the 1990s when US, Russia, and China were all buddies. But today they're not. So therefore, the capacity of the international system to constrain unilateral exercise of power, which is what the whole thing, we talked about rules-based order. But if, as you know, most of you civil servants, I mean, if there's nobody to enforce the rules, you can have any kind of rules. Rules mean nothing if there's no judiciary, if there's no police force to enforce those rules. But the international system has always been anarchic. There is no superior authority. But today, what little of international institutions that we've created today, are they breaking down? And then what happens to any global governance in this remains in doubt. Then you have WTO, the World Trading Organization that was created to consolidate the Washington Consensus, the celebration of China's rise as a capitalist state. Now, when Trump said, look, I'm going to put unilateral tariffs, I don't much care what WTO rules are. I know Mr. Mehta is here. Did anybody make a phone call to WTO? Instead, everyone lined up in front of the White House to cut bilateral deals. So this notion, I mean, our Commerce Ministry still sometimes thinks there's a WTO rules. But the fact is, might is right. Economic might is economic right today. What we've seen, therefore, it depends on your individual capacity to negotiate, to deal with the extortionist demands of Trump. Yesterday, Japanese had to get their tariffs down from 25% to 15%, had to promise a new investment of $500 billion, 550 actually, in the US, which Trump will decide how best to use them. That is, if you want my protection, give me your money, I decide what to do with that money. So even by protection racket standards, this is really an extraordinary moment. So the question then becomes, whether there is, so we thought, okay, UN doesn't work. The alliance system works, that US had these alliances with Europeans and with the Asians like Japan and South Korea, and that alliances are a shared interest. But today, Trump is saying basically, if you want me to protect you, you got to give me money. So that's where it is. So that institutions as well is breaking down. And then you saw the Tianjin celebrations of the SCO. I know there's a lot of enthusiasm, but I don't want to be a wet blanket puncturing some of that. Look, if you took the people who are at SCO and you put China aside, the rest of them don't even constitute 10% of what China is doing. So this notion that somehow we all coming together to deal with the American monster, because it is just China. When we talk about the BRICS, China's GDP is at $20 trillion. Rest of the BRICS put together, there's not much out there. India is at 4, Russia is at 2, Brazil is at 1, South Africa is at $500 billion. So this is your BRICS. So this notion that there is somehow you can construct a trade union against the director or presumed self-appointed director of the international system, then it is not going to be easy. Saying you can try and do that, that there's a problem out there in terms of constructing institutions like BRICS or SCO because of the power differential. Finally, what matters is power, and on that, the power today is really concentrated in the hands of the US and China. The question is, how do you deal with it then? What kind of strategies can you develop is the big challenge. So while you have the rhetoric, the fact is, India and China, they had a meeting in Tianjin, but if you read carefully what they was said after that, we're not saying the same thing. We both, under pressure from the Americans. India says, look, the border should be stabilized first. The Chinese say, let's have normal relations, start buying goods from us, start taking, lift all the economic restrictions. So there's a bit of give, bit of take, but the structure of the imbalance between India and China is not disappeared. It'll be there. And then 75 years after independence, we have a border, we're nowhere near settling the border. We're still talking about maintaining peace and tranquility. We're hoping that we can resume the actual negotiations on the border. That was one of the agreements that was reached in Tianjin. 2 agreements. One to maintain peace and tranquility. The other was to begin to renew the negotiations on the boundary settlement itself. But then this is not going to happen overnight. And I think the power balance between India and China has deepened in favor of China. That's a new reality. Therefore, dealing with the reality will be a challenge. So therefore, the internal divisions in a trade union politics. But this is not the first time. Go back to the non-aligned movement. Go back to the pan-Arabist movement. Go back to the pan-Islamist movement. Every one of these supranational, transcendental movements, the idea we can use this to change the global equations, fell apart because the internal differences within these movements. If Islamic movement were succeeded, you wouldn't have the problems in the Middle East that you have. If Saudi Arabia and Iran can see eye to eye, Israel would be nowhere. But they don't. And I think so for this notion that you simply bring people together on the basis of ethnicity, on the basis of religion, on the basis of language, or on the basis of developmental status, all those movements have failed. This is not an argument against creating movements. At least you need some resistance to hegemony. But I think we should be very clear the limits and capabilities of these kind of movements. So therefore you have actually, what do we do with multilateralism? How do we build multilateral institutions to ensure some kind of rules in the international system? I think that problem is with us, and I don't see that problem disappearing anytime soon. So therefore you have actually, in the end, what does all this mean for India? And I think that is the big question, and that's the last set of points I wanted to make. Put simply, the external world, as we talked, is changing dramatically. But the notion that we can deal with this world without making changes at home, that notion is not going to fly. what we did in 1991, I'm sure many of the former civil servants were a part of the process, that you changed within to deal with a new external circumstance in which Soviet Union collapsed, therefore you had to redo your foreign policy. And your economic model had collapsed within, therefore you had to develop a new economic strategy to deal with the world. And that has worked reasonably well, and I think to India's credit, it's done a reasonably good job of changing itself within in order to deal with the challenges that had emerged at the global level. Today, I think we are at a 1991 kind of moment where the external change demands substantive, significant internal reform on the economic side, on the political side, and on the foreign policy side. That's where the challenge is, and I think the GST is one response we've seen already. Speaking at the Economics Times Summit, Prime Minister Modi said, I'm going to unleash an arsenal of reform. We'll see how much of that reform will take place in the coming years. But I think you significantly need to change, reorient our economy to cope with the principal changes that are on the economic side that have taken place globally, which means the markets are not going to be as open as they were before. But within that, how do you negotiate free trade agreements? How do you work out trading, create your exports? For example, Russia and China are not a substitute for the United States. How much you love the SEO. India exports to Russia, $5 billion worth of goods. Imports, the trade deficit with Russia is about $62 billion. You're only importing natural resources from Russia. We export $15 billion to China. Our trade deficit with China is almost $100 billion. Now, we export $90 billion to the US. Now, Russia and China put together take not even 1/4 of the exports you do to the United States. So those who say, we might be surprised by, there seems to be some play between Modi and Trump to find some common ground in the last 24 hours. But that was, in a sense, what do you do with your economic dependence, the connections that have emerged in the last 30 years with the US? We know that dependence on one side is not good. Just as, for example, as we said, all our manufacturing imports come from China. All your weapons come from, still 60% or spare parts from Russia. Therefore, when we talk about strategic autonomy, normally we say it about the US, but we are also tied to the Russians, we're tied to the Chinese. So how do you transcend this situation of excessive dependence on Russia for spare parts, weapons, China for manufactured imports, and the US, I'm not even talking about Gmail and WhatsApp and Meta, so okay, that's another world. So therefore, the emphasis on Atmanirbharta or self-reliance is the right one. But how you get there from here, I think is a huge challenge. That requires actually deep changes within the internal system. And doing that in the next few years is going to be a huge, huge challenge. And finally, I'll come to the foreign policy. So this idea you can jump from the American bed to the Chinese bed, which is what the same, So we, Galwan, we Kuti with the Chinese. Op Sindoor, we Kuti with the Turks. Or today, something Trump has said, therefore we don't like what Trump has said. But countries can't jump from one corner to another corner. Because your structure, your economy, your politics are deeply tied. Therefore, you have to manage this complex interdependence with other powers. And there are going to be no easy answers, which our TV anchors want every day. You can thunder against China one day, next day it's a great, India, Modi and Xi have shaken hands, or Modi and Putin have shaken their hands, so therefore we can screw the Americans. But it's not so easy. I think, as I said, you export $90 billion to the Americans. Anyone who knows, whether it's the jewelers in Jaipur, whether it's the apparel exporters from Tirupur, or whether it is the diamond merchants in Gujarat, you're tied deeply. These have jobs, so therefore you got to deal with that reality. And I think so. The managing the external world through our diplomacy, while retaining our autonomy, and at the same time enhancing our economic strength, those are the big challenges. And I would say the 1991 moment is back here. And the question is, can we generate enough domestic consensus and create a broad set of policies that to deal with this new order? And I think in this, it's not just a job of the government. I would say the civil society, the elites, and including places like Rajasthan International Center, I think all of us have a role to shape that new consensus, and hopefully we'll get this. Thank you for your attention.
Just give the name and the question.
Yeah.
So we start. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So I have a broad and a basic question.
Next question at the back.
Are we looking at a unipolar world, multipolar world, or a bipolar world in next decade or so? Thank you.
Look, I think, sorry, should I go one by one?
We can take 3 questions and a question from the back, please, now.
I have a very specific question regarding
We can let's do a
GST.
question at the back first. So someone, hand at the back? Yeah, please. We'll take it next, later.
No, he's all.
Should I complete the question?
Yeah, let's go ahead now. Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead.
So my question is regarding lowering the GST on automobiles very recently from 18 to 5%. Is that a counter to the changed US tariffs?
Just give the mic. Sure. Third question and
I can go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
Good evening, sir. My name is Aryan Joshi. I am a student and also an alumni of GGU. So my question is, ever since the Ukraine and Russia war broke out, India has maintained an official stance that India chooses the side of peace. But now with the changes in the Europe and the Western world, with France telling hospital to prepare for wars in 2026 and US renaming the Department of Defense to Department of War, if tomorrow war breaks out between the NATO and Russia and Article 5 comes into place, how will India deal with the crisis?
So I think we'll take the 3 and then.
Yeah, I think the first question was on
Hold the
unipolar.
mic
You see,
closer.
look, I think there is a big trap in these definitions. Our typical Indian mind, we get trapped in these big definitions. Look, I think most of them today, we keep saying we want a multipolar world, right? India is this favorite phrase in Delhi. Is it an aspiration or is it a description? If you say the description of power distribution in the international system, I can see power clearly concentrated in the hands of US and China. And between them, the US is at $30 trillion GDP, China is at $20 trillion GDP. The next best is Japan, India, Germany, around $4 trillion. Now, you can call it multipolar, there are many actors, but does it mean anything? So, but I think, just as in the old days, there were non-alignment, multi-alignment, multipolar, multilateral. So this way we kind of, keep debating. But that doesn't tell you my exports are tied to the Americans. My manufacturing is tied to the Chinese. So how does the general description of where the world is, it doesn't help you at all. But if you start from the assumption, what are my interests? As opposed to a kind of this textual definition of the world in which we love that kind of metaphysics, it means nothing in the end. So you've got to say, look, what are my interests? Now, how do I increase my exports? Where do I go? Chinese are not buying anything from you. Russians are not buying anything from you. Therefore, I think that sets the stage rather than getting trapped into this definitional, metaphysical issues of where the polarities. Studying the distribution of power is an important one. But any study, first principles will tell you the US is the dominant power. China is rising fast. Whether it will catch up or not, we don't know. 5 years ago, people said, look, China is going to overtake the US. They're not there yet. But on a whole range of science and technology areas, Chinese have crossed. So I think we are actually falling behind both. The second set of questions, I think, is the GST, I don't know about automobiles, but in general, it was about expanding your own market. So that was the general idea, that the US is putting pressure, therefore you expand your own domestic market so that you give some relief to your producers who are otherwise dependent on exports. That's only one part. I think there are a whole range of other reforms. How many of those will come, we'll see. The third issue was on what do we do between the US and NATO. Look, if you talk to the Russians, they say, look, we're already in a war with the West. They say it's actually a proxy war. Now the Europeans are talking about doing more. I think there is already a war for 3 years. I'm not being critical of the government, but I'm saying normally, historically, we used to say we are non-aligned, we didn't get caught between US and Russia. But in this, we are right in the middle. Who would have thought 35 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia is a factor in India's relations with the US or with the West? So I think this time, I think the Ukraine has taught us a lesson that, look, by whether you're making money on the war or not is the issue. But I think you can't insert yourself into other people's wars. So we can keep talking about peace, but look, who has done the brokering of even minor deals? Turkey has done. Was it Qatar, Satish, or Saudis have done some deals on prisoner exchanges? We're not part of the process. So I think it's best to, when big powers are fighting, I would say don't get involved. But unfortunately, how our oil purchases went, I mean, we got caught in that. So I would say stay away, look after your own interests with both sides, rather than getting trapped by what happens between the sides. So you're in the worst possible situation. Trump stands in front of an aircraft in Alaska and welcoming Putin, and he says India is the one which is creating problems. So that's what, because we become the collateral damage without any fault of yours, except that you said, look, I need oil, so I'm getting cheap oil, I'll buy it. So this way, I think a lot more prudence in terms of how we relate to the other conflicts is important.
Yeah. I think we'll take 4 questions from the back, but just questions. Your hand's there, so we can give that side, and then we'll come back to.
There's some people just
Yeah. It's also just some of the back and just give the mic, please. Yeah.
So I'm Mano Punya from St. Stephen's College. Am I audible?
Yeah. Closer,
So in the start of the talk, you said there's this new wave of neoliberal conservatism, or rhetoric of counter-globalization. So, sir, what will be the end of it? Will the West be successful again in imposing some sort of this rhetoric of counter-globalization on us? And there's one more question. After there was this whole rhetoric of global war on terror, but after Operation Sindoor, there was very less, what we can say, support for India regarding this question of terrorism. So, don't you think this has become, the war on terror has become a futile exercise nowadays?
This gentleman here had his mic, so he's having the mic. He's had his hand up for some time.
Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for the talk. My name is Saurav Kumar. I am a research scholar at University of Rajasthan. So my question is related to the popular debate right now going on in our country. The one side which says that having one good friend is better than having 5 not so good friends. One side says that we should have multi-alignment, multi-vector strategy. So at one hand, the world is becoming more and more polarized, because even if we see in the Cold War, there were 2 camps. You can join either of them. But now there is no clearly defined any camp. So what is your take on these 2 debates? Like what path India should take exactly?
One more question from the back. So.
Good evening, everyone. Sir, I have a few questions. First, the notion
take one
that
question we'll take one question per person. So.
Okay. So one question is, the equation till now have been that India is seen as a counterweight to China by the US and its focus on Indo-Pacific. Now that we have this tariff war and all going on, so what is the current equation and the equation that can be the time to be?
So we'll take that.
I think it's not just a counter-globalization actually. Some people are calling it a counter-revolution. Counter-revolution against liberalism, liberal values at home, or the liberal universalism, and the globalization as part of that. So that is what is unfolding. But if I can tell you the end, I mean, I'd get a Nobel Prize, but I think a good thing or interesting thing about revolutions is you can't predict their course, how this will play out. Now, even within the US itself, Trump has a moment of hegemony today. While the US political system is actually designed for inefficiencies in order to prevent the concentration of power. There's a bicameral legislature with clearly defined powers. There are federalism. US states are far more powerful than our states. Yet you have this man today unconstrained. Now, will this be a permanent feature? Will it last out by the end of this year, next year? We don't know. And if we'll all be out of business. People like me, analysts. So you got to keep watch this space, keep using your basic knowledge to follow these. I mean, so I don't think predictions is the way to go, but I think to understand the forces at work and the constraints on those forces and how this might play out and how does India adjust to that. That is the issue. Second, I think again, look, like multipolarity, unipolarity, this multi-alignment, again, you see, don't get trapped in this definitional ideas. In fact, I would say actively, when you hear them, keep them aside. Now, you say, look, we're already saying we're too dependent on the US for exports at this point. We're too dependent on the US for your manufacturing exports depend on Chinese imports. And your security depends on getting more weapons from Russia. So it's not a question of how many friends do you have. For large countries like India, you should have been producing a lot of the weapons at home. You should be manufacturing a lot of things at home. For example, on vaccines, thanks to the 1950s, the mass vaccination program in India, India was producing most of the vaccines and the intermediate components within India itself. But in the 2000s, Chinese started dumping stuff. If you're a manufacturer of vaccines, it's easier to get cheap stuff from China, do it. Now, that system doesn't work. So the question is, what is our strategy if we're a 1.5 billion people, fourth largest economy? How do we translate this idea? We need to do more at home in terms of you can't do everything at home, but large countries like India, US, China, Russia would want to do more at home. I think in the name of globalization, we had actually ceded a lot of ground on the manufacturing to the Chinese. We didn't do enough after the collapse of the Soviet Union to reduce the dependence there. And post 91, I mean, you have some people pointing out your entire life on the iPhone or Android, just two of them, one is Google, one is Apple, your life is tied to that. So how much of it can you do? Which is the smarter policy? Those are the choices. Those are the choices I think we really have to make at this point, which means you can't do everything overnight. For example, I mean, you could say, look, in one of the meetings, this was 3 years ago, Prime Minister Modi asked, in 1947, we were producing more weapons at home than in 2025. What happened in between? The British, whatever they needed to, they can't bring all their ammunition or everything from the US, from UK to India. Therefore, they set up a whole lot of factories in India. And brilliantly, we nationalized all of them. So today, you created fundamental inefficiencies in the way your defense production is organized. Therefore, you have a problem. So therefore, I think the need to change, the need to reform how we do defense, how we do defense production. So take, for example, space. Our government talks about major reforms in space that has created a lot of dynamism. But there's still no Space Act. There was an act that was introduced in the parliament 5 years ago, it lapsed. Much of the world is moving rapidly to a private sector. We have Musk launching more satellites than NASA does. But in India, we're just talking about those startups. But where is the law that guides activity within space? I think we have a lot of core work of legislation, regulation that facilitates greater production incentives in India. And I think nuclear, monopoly of the Department of Atomic Energy, do you change that? We're talking about introducing a new law. It didn't come in the monsoon session. I don't know, we'll see whether it comes in the next session. So I think there are a whole lot of legislative work. Unless you change the terms under which Indian business operates, you won't be able to get anywhere near China, forget the US.
Now you can go to the next forward row. There's a hand there. You can just hand the mic, sir. And if you can just give the mic to the gentleman in the black. And
thank you. I'm Ladu Chaudhary.
hold the mic slightly closer.
I'm teaching at University of Rajasthan. My question is really what went wrong in terms of personal chemistry between Modi and Trump? Thank you.
Okay. We'll take two more questions. There is a gentleman in the white right above you. So, give him. Upper. The first gentleman.
Namaste, sir. My name is Kumar. Nobody is talking about very impressive military parade few days ago in Beijing. There are new weapons, and China is an unfriendly neighbor of ours, and we had very bad experience of fighting with China. So, what do you think about that?
And just the gentleman next to him, he had his hand up for some time.
My name is Madhav Singh. My question is, as you said, that it's all eventually comes down to the economic power. And China at $20 trillion, Russia at 30, and India, Japan, Germany at 4. Why we stuck at 4? Can you to go back? Why we are not at 10 or 15? What went wrong? As you have said that we have to reform a lot of things. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll take the questions.
No, I think you should ask so many civil servants here. I mean, they might tell you what happened in the. Yeah. Yeah. So I think, look, that's a long story. I don't think we will get there. Look, on the China question, look, till the 80s, we're roughly equal to the Chinese on per capita GDP, on GDP itself. That's what reform that has produced China, accelerate its growth to, grew at 10% for nearly 4 decades, which is what makes it the second largest economy. And going back to Deng Xiaoping talked about 4 modernizations: economic, political, science and technology, and defense. It is the last 2 you see. I mean, the emphasis on defense modernization, the emphasis on technological modernization. What Chinese have done, I mean, I think is phenomenal. So today, Chinese have historically the fastest pace of defense production. Americans were like that in the 1945. Within 2 years, they started producing, tanks like a vegetable, churning them out like tanks and aircraft. That's how the US won the Second World War. Today, China is doing that in a dramatic way. And I think we are nowhere near that. You ask the Air Force Chief, he's constantly saying, what the hell is HAL up to? But then you're stuck in a framework which you're not able to reform quickly enough. We say AMCA will get the advanced medium combat aircraft. They said, yeah, private sector is welcome. No private sector is willing to join. Because you set the terms in such a way, you leave it to the bureaucrats, they know how to seemingly open, but is not actually open. So even ISRO, for all the thing of ISRO is one of the better public sector organizations, the way they do, it's all right, but we don't want to give up control. See, that's what the habit of the monopolies, they don't want to give up control. So if a government, a 3-term government with full majority can't do it, it tells you something, the power of the permanent bureaucracy. Ministers come and go, prime ministers come and go, but the system will run out. So, but this is where I think the challenge, the fundamental challenge, can we change the structures? If we don't change, the costs of that. What you said about Galwan, it's just nothing. I think next time, if you see a war with China, if you think of the drones, the missiles, the longer range missiles, the precision that Chinese are going to demonstrate it, as we say, look, is the one front between US and China and Pakistan. The problems are going to be enormous. If we don't move now, that's why we keep saying 1991 moment. If you don't move, if you don't change internally, your external situation will only get worse. I think there was someone, and what happened between Trump and Modi. Look, I know Satish was in Foreign Office. He tell you, look, sovereigns' personal whims matter. And that's why partly you please the other sovereign with various tricks so that you get your things done. But in the end, there is a structural questions, and I think that's where the bigger failure, I think, has been. Trump doesn't understand India. But one thing that is consistent with him is the fact that India is a high tariff country, which is not untrue. You have to ask any one of our neighbors how difficult it is to get anything into India. But for him, if people have forgotten in the first term, Trump scrapped the GSP, the Generalized Scheme of Preferences for India. The Harley-Davidson argument, the first phone call between Modi and Trump. See, he still hasn't forgotten the Harley-Davidson. Though Harley-Davidson couldn't do much in India. But when it says, look, India must open up its... there is a book by his former commerce trade representative, Robert Lighthizer, he talks about, he negotiated with India in the first Trump administration. He says, look, he couldn't get very far, but he kept files on the top Indian industrialists. If you knew what A&A wanted, you knew India's commercial policy. If you knew what the top 10 industrialists want, then the quantitative control, qualitative control orders, the whole series of protecting Indian industry has produced a set of results of its own. Similarly, on agriculture, we can say, look, agriculture is a red line. But Trump doesn't understand, given the scale of Indian agriculture and the consequence of changing it. But we also can't forever depend on what happened in Punjab in the 1960s. Is the only way we're going to do agriculture. So I think changes or reform again in the sectors becomes very critical to be able to deal with what's happening in the outside world. So personal chemistry can be managed eventually, as it seems to be in the last 2 days. But it's really the structural factors that I think we need to address.
Yeah. There's one on China, and you will do it later. China and India should be friends immediately because they're unveiling weapons, or
yeah, no. See, the friendship. Look, this is what we use the term friendship. Countries have interests. Yeah. China was willing to do things which today it's not willing to do with you on the border because they're sitting on this 3,600 kilometers. No, actually, we don't even agree on the length of the border. Some people say it's 4,000. China says 2,000 officially. But the fact is, their military capability on the Indo-Tibetan border has dramatically changed because of its military modernization. And India is trying to catch up, and that catch up itself produced crisis, which is what Galwan in the end was about. You try to catch up, he says, look, he's trying to prevent you from catching up. He's got more money to give all your neighbors, though we can try to give a little bit. He's kept, all our neighbors have signed on to Belt and Road Initiative. You saw most of them in SCO meeting. So it's again, you see, the question is, if you don't correct the power imbalance, so it's not being nice, it's not being friendly, it's really about how do you manage power imbalances. That is the real story. Which is the other
it's all three done. Thanks, sir. We'll just take 4 quick questions from front, and the gentleman in the red, he had his hand up. Just give him the mic, and then 3 questions from the front rows. Yeah. Just help pass the mic quickly. This is in the center.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Ravi. This thing coming up that India is lagging behind. America in 1945 during First World War, they have gone production very fast. China has gone very fast. And India is lagging in every field. You said legislator not coming up. Don't we think that democracy is pulling us down? China is doing it because communist country, there is nobody listen. Even Muslim religion is not being
just the question, democracy pulling us down.
So it is just
what your question just put.
And the nature of Indians keeping personal interest above every time than the national interest.
This gentleman here, and the three front rows after this. No? Okay. Gentleman here, right here with the hand up, right next to you.
Good afternoon. I have a slightly contrived speculative question. Globalization cannot be reversed with advances in technology. That is what I think. And I still aesthetically believe in the universalism or the universality of values. And more than 100 years ago, Einstein advocated for a world government. I personally think, barring fluctuations at the local level, the real problem is the growth of China, and America cannot take as somebody who could be sort of how would, so the speculative question is, how would Trump behave if China was not what it is today?
Question from that side. Is there a hand that side? There's a hand right there, blue t-shirt, sir. Blue shirt.
Sir, I am Somdev. I have a very small question. I want to know whether India is pushed towards China because of this US backlash. Because during the last 3 months, the Indo-US relationship is at lowest ebb. And if we are pushed to China for all this, would it survive without solving the border issues?
I think the first question, look, I think 75 years after independence, we shouldn't be blaming democracy for our problems. Look, I think it's a collective failure at the policy level, at the political class level. So I think democracy should be the last one we should use to, explain to ourselves why we've not done as well as China has. Because a lot of other countries democracies, non-democracies have done so much better than us. They can keep the cities cleaner, they can run their municipalities better. This has nothing to do with democracy, and I think we really have to think more deeply. Second, I think on the question of, see, look, universalism is beautiful in its conception. The problem is in execution. That's where the problem is, whether it was the Marxist conception of universalism or the Silicon Valley conception of, technological universalism, all have problems. And I think world government, if you read Nehru's first speech to the All India Radio on Indian foreign policy, September 7th, 1946, just the day after he became the executive vice chairman of the government, which was like the prime minister under the viceroy. He talks about, in the interwar period, there was this famous movement called One World. That is, First World War was so bad, the only way to answer is a universal one government. So if you read the text of the speech, he says one government is capitalized. O is capital, G is capital. So that was the interwar period. Our liberal lawyers, our leaders really believed you can have one world or a world government. And that's why you took Kashmir to the UN. Right? 75 years later, you can't get it out. So I think today there's a surge of nationalist reaction against universalism. Whether this will last, we don't know. So I don't think India will be the last one to agree to a world government. We don't give visa to the UN Secretary General if he kind of says something stupid about Kashmir. We won't let him in. So I don't think anybody is ready for world government. But it's a nice idea. You might strive there, but what little we have achieved in the last 100 years of global institutions, even that is falling apart. Which was the...
One was about...
yeah. What was it?
One of the question here about... what?
No, briefly, just mention, give me a trigger point.
Yes. Whether without solving
yeah.
And the other one here was linked
disputes,
that if there was no US, how would our China relations be? So
I'll come to... See, look, I think that China has risen. Look, we didn't much... That's what, look, you see, if the distribution of power keeps changing, you've got to come to terms with it. That if, US didn't think China was a problem. They let them in, they supported China, they gave market access to China. They got educated all the Chinese university guys. Today, they're all the ones who are challenging the US. They brought them today, most Americans believe it was a mistake to have brought China into the WTO in 2001. But countries make mistakes. So I think our problem is, are we reading the world situation sufficiently sensibly and work out the solutions rather than, saying what counterfactually what would happen or not happen. At this point, what is it that we do? How do we understand the world? How do we devise the best possible response? I think those are the issues. There's no point going back, or for that matter, on terrorism, right? You asked about... No.
Sir, my question was very simple.
Push, yeah, okay, got it, yeah. Look, I think, I got it. Look, you are a 1.5 billion people to talk about being pushed. I mean, that itself, I think, is a very demeaning term. Are we some little babe in the wood? Oh, Russia is being pushed to China. I mean, look, Russia has existed as a state for 500 years. Huge tradition of statecraft. They've got 6,000 nuclear weapons. But, to think of the world in these terms, I think is a fundamental disservice. That Russia knows what it is doing. Today, its convergence of its interests with China are real, and it sees a coalition to fight the Americans. So nobody has pushed Russia. Though a lot of people, we say, oh, Russians are so nice, but for China they would be. But China and Russia were communist allies in the 50s. They fought in the 60s, became buddies again in the 90s. So nobody's pushed. So for India to be, to say India is being pushed to China, look, we might have made mistakes in assessing China, which we did in the 50s and 60s. So today you have a problem on the border. You don't have to be pushed. Nobody's going to push us. As I said, look, all the Tianjin style, in the end, the border dispute is not sorted out. Mr. Modi did not sign any agreement with China. There was only one press statement from our side saying we talked about the border, we talked about, improving trade relations. So no, nobody's pushed around. Even, look, you can't push Maldives. Maldives is non-aligned between India and China. Nepal, I mean, Satish knows very well. Nepal plays a beautiful game between India and China. You can't push Bhutan. You can't push anyone. So this notion somehow countries can be pushed. Everybody operates on their own interests. The question is, do we calculate our interests properly and devise the policies to pursue?
So we'll do 2 questions here and the gentleman there, and then if there is time, one more. Yeah, if there is time, we'll do that.
Sir, Dr. Mahesh Arora, as soon as the Trump tariff attack was happening, instead of damage controlling, we started annoying US, Trump. And as a double was there as this started happening. Then
don't get into that level of detail. Yeah.
And then Jain Shankar, and then SCO. So instead of trying to kind of, so it was a bit more crude and undiplomatic kind of.
Okay.
Sir, our relation with our all 5 countries is not good these days. Do you think the role of China in this?
Okay. And Satish, you want a question? Okay. Comment. Is there any other question in the front row? We'll take a last question. That will be the last. Satish, you might as well make the comment because we're running out of time.
No,
you might as well make your comment, and we're running out of time.
I think my comment is only on your comment. You wish you get Nobel Prize. I hope you do get, but not this year because then it will be 100% tariff, penal tariff.
Okay, so I mean, the questions.
Yeah. Look, I think the problem was this. I think, look, India knew there was a Trump second term, there were going to be new issues. That's the reason why we had a summit in February with Trump. February 13th was a meeting. I mean, it went reasonably well. You started negotiating on trade. You started negotiating with the first one to start negotiations. You said, look, okay, immigration is a problem. Okay, you send our boys back, illegals out there. So you started responding to his concerns. But I think as it became stronger domestically, the public pressure they put, I think left very little room for India to respond positively. So it's not that we made a mistake. Look, in fact, India has not said a word against Trump. See, I think it was a good policy. Don't do tutu meme with him on a public basis. We didn't do anything. TV anchors are doing it. The government of India did not, no minister said one word in response to Peter Navarro, in response to Lutnick, or in response to what is being said every day. Because you realize, look, don't argue, wait for your turn, but be firm, be strong, don't yield. So that is the strategy, and I think it reasonably worked. If what happened last night or this morning is true, then maybe there's room to negotiate. But you have problems on trade. I'm not sure if a Commerce Ministry understood the gravity of change on the trade system. How we negotiated on the trade, I think you could argue, I mean, even former negotiators say, look, the position on agriculture was not smart enough, or a position on protecting your industry was not smart enough. So there are issues there. Those, I'm not a trade expert, but I think there are real issues there. So I don't think it's a problem of being Doval was smart or Jaishankar was not smart. I mean, I don't think that is not the level of the problem. See, look, if we bought Russian oil was the problem. If we had given you the cover, why wouldn't you stop buying Russian oil if that was the only issue? If you bought it as an opportunity, you also can stop it with the opportunity. The second question was what? I mean,
about China, the problem that's already been asked, but
yeah. Look, I think China is a problem. Look, the question is, look, he's grown, right, in our neighborhood. You didn't have a competition in the 60s from China. China didn't even exist in the UN. To be honest, I mean, we screwed up what we had a free run in the ADB, in IMF, in the World Bank. Chinese were not present till the late 70s. But what did we do with it? Did we make the best use of it? But then, looking back at history, China's used its opportunities. Today we get upset with the Americans at the drop of a trade war or 71, one ship came here. Chinese fought a war with the Americans between 1950 and 53 called the Korean War. Thousands of Chinese died. Thousands of Chinese. Mao Zedong's own son died in that war. But 15 years later, he was cutting a deal with the Americans. That's what powers do, you know. It's not, you know, we still come in 1971. Trade war, he's not killed any Indian. The Chinese and Americans have killed each other. But still they're buddies, some days they're buddies, some days they're not. So I think we got to, if you go back to Kautilya, you go back to Panchatantra, I mean, think of these in power terms, think of these as structural changes rather than this emotional thing of, we like him today, we don't like him. And I think that's part of the problem, rather than seeing Chinese have more money to give to our neighbors. They give weapons to all our neighbors. They're bringing ships into our neighborhood because China has risen. So it's not somehow our neighbors are bad or neighbors are taking advantage.
So we are actually out of time, but I think D.R. Mehtaji wants to make a very short comment. So I think with the permission of chair and because I have the mic, we'll just let him make a very short comment, sir, because we do close on time.
First is that we greatly enjoyed your excellent talk. Second is, when I was a child, I was told something, but before that I would say that the present crisis may create some problem for India, and that would be for a while. What I was told in the childhood was that Dab mat beta, dab aur mara. India must stand firm at this point of time.
Thank you. Thank you. Sir, would you want to make any comments? So, thank you very much for the audience for being here. Thank you to our chair, and especially thank you and a round of applause for our speaker, Professor C. Raj Mohan. A really enlightening, very candid and presentation without the kind of the fog of politics, putting India's position where it was. So thank you everyone. Thank you to the Jigyasa Talk series and Rajasthan AI Pensioners Association for associating here. Thank you to the staff of the RIC for helping coordinate that. And thank you to the audience for being here in numbers, asking questions. Thank you very much. Good evening, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you, sir. Thank you.